Welcome to the Procurement Professional channel. This is Ashraf Saleh, who will explain the CIPS L4 methodology. In the previous lecture, we started by explaining the first book, L4M1, Scope of Influence of Procurement and Supply. We explained the first topic, which talks about compare the concepts of procurement and supply chain management. We said that explanation method will be in two directions. The first direction is by presenting a practical example through which the first topic is fully explained and practical model was completed in the previous lecture. Today is the second direction by going over what the book covers to explain this topic. Let's start together with the second direction. L4M1, Scope of Influence of Procurement and Supply. Chapter 1. Understand and analyze the added value that can be achieved through procurement and supply chain management. 1.1. Compare the concepts of procurement and supply chain management. The first topic consists of 6 points, as we mentioned earlier. The first point. 1.1.1 Definitions of procurement, supply chain management, and supply chain networks. The second point, 1.1.2, compare the role and function of supply chain management with procurement. The third point, 1.1.3, definition and function of supply chain tiering. The fourth point, 1.1.4, definition and issues related to complex supply chains. The fifth point, 1.1.5, definitions of logistics and materials management. Finally, the sixth point, 1.16, definitions of waste management and closed-loop recycling. Let's go through the first topic, which is 1.1, compare the concepts of procurement and supply chain management. Procurement involves obtaining something, tangible like goods or intangible like services. Procurement process begins by identifying a need. Procurement process completes once the goods or services that meet that need are delivered. Now the first point, 1.1, definitions of procurement, supply chain management, and supply chain networks. Procurement is strategic function. Purchasing and supply are functions within the procurement process. Purchasing is the act of physically ordering and buying something. Supply is the infrastructure which ensure that products or services get from the supplier to the customer. Without procurement, there could be no purchasing, and without purchasing, there would be no supply. What is a supply chain? Procurement professionals use a supply chain when buying goods and services. Supply chain are integral to a well-functioning procurement operation. They must be managed in order to be effective. A supply chain may be simple or extremely complex. A supply chain involves a network of individuals, organizations, technology, activities, and resources to make sure goods and services flow along the chain. If one part of the chain fails, every organization further along the chain can also fail. All parts of the supply chain need to work together. What is a supply chain? A typical supply chain begins with the producers, raw materials, then suppliers, manufacturers, distributors, retailers, and end users, customers. The supply chain can be found with the three main industry sectors. Primary sector includes industries that extract natural resources from the earth. Examples, mining for metals, drilling for oil, agriculture, and fishing. Secondary sector includes the manufacturing and construction industries. In this sector, raw materials are converted into finished products. For example, the oil that was drilled by the primary sector can be refined into diesel, petrol, or kerosene. Tertiary sector consists of service industries. These are the business that support the production and distribution process. Examples include insurance, education, and healthcare. Stages in supply chain. The aim of a supply chain is to procure and supply something to the end user or consumer, such as bread or bag of rice. Supply chain consists of two stages, upstream and downstream. Upstream, the supply flow of raw materials, components, parts, etc., needed for production. Downstream, the supply chain that the organization feeds into, from product to end user. Supply chain management. For a supply chain to work effectively, it has to be managed. The process will not function effectively without procurement involvement to ensure all aspects of the chain are performing correctly. Supply chain management, SCM, aims to reduce cost, improve value, and reduce risk. SCM also involves managing customer relationships. The supplier is a customer of the raw material producer. The manufacturer is a customer of the supplier. The distributor is a customer of the manufacturer, and the consumer is a customer of the distributor. There is only ever one consumer in a supply chain, the end user. Supply chain network. A supply chain is the process of mapping out how raw materials are manufactured and how they are delivered to the consumer. A supply chain network, SCN, is an extension of a supply chain. Individual supply chain is part of supply chain networks. A supply chain network would include all other parties involved in the process. Supply chain networks are usually designed around 5 areas. 1. External suppliers, who is going to provide materials to make the goods or services. 2. Manufacturers, who is going to produce the end products. 3. Distribution, wholesale centers, who is going to manage the storage and transportation of the products. 4. Logistics, who is going to ensure that everything is where it should be at the required time. 5. Consumer demand. Do the intended individuals have a need or desire for the end product? Now, let's move to the second point. 1.1.2. Compare the role and function of supply chain management with procurement. Supply chain management and procurement are not the same thing, although they are interlinked. Without procurement, there would be no supply chain. Procurement is about obtaining products and services in response to a need. Supply chain refers to the infrastructure involved in physically getting the products and services delivered. Procurement includes the followings: preparing specifications, monitoring quality, sourcing, buying, stock control, disposal of waste. Within procurement, the process is competing when the product or service the buyer has been tasked to source and buy has been delivered, checked, and paid for. The fundamental difference between procurement and supply chain management is that the process of supply chain management continues until the end product reaches the consumer. The role of procurement could have ended long before this stage. Now let's move to the third point. 1.1.3. Definition and function of supply chain tiering. Tiering is the structured ordering and organization of suppliers so that organizations downstream work with fewer suppliers upstream. Some more complex supply chains have levels or tiers of suppliers. The different tiers of suppliers links into each other like a chain. One supplier provides goods services to another, who then transforms, alters, or resells these goods services to sell to another, and so on. The lower the tier number, the closer to the buyer the supplier. For example, a Tier 1 supplier would supply the buyer directly, whereas a Tier 2 supplier would supply a Tier 1 supplier. This referred to as supply chain tiering. Supply chain tiering initially started in the manufacturing industry, but is currently used across many manufacturing operations. An example structure of supplier tiering: buying organization, first-tier supplier, second-tier supplier. One of the benefits of tiering is that it allows for the concentrated development of a smaller number of suppliers. This enables the buying organization at each tier stage to leverage improved supplier relationships. As there are few suppliers to manage, more time and resources can be allocated to supplier relationship management. Supply chain tiering does have its disadvantages. Buyers are more susceptible to risk factors including compliance, ethics, and sustainability from suppliers outside of Tier 1, as they have less visibility and control over the supply chain. Buyers must look beyond Tier 1 suppliers when reviewing and mapping their supply chain to mitigate these risks. Now, let's move to the fourth point. 1.1.4. Definition and issues related to complex supply chains. Supply chain tiering is an important feature of complex supply chain. We can look at specific example of supply chain tiering within a complex supply chain using an example of a car manufacturer. A car manufacturer is a type of original equipment manufacturer who is generally perceived as the producer of own branded parts or equipment which are sold to other manufacturers for production and retail. OEMs sit at the top of the supplier tier. OEM, first tier supplier, second tier supplier. Using the example of a car manufacturer, the complex supply chain may be: a car OEM needs an engine to fit in the shell of a vehicle. A Tier 1 supplier will supply the engine to the OEM. However, the Tier 1 supplier will not be able to manufacture and assemble all the engine parts. A Tier 2 supplier will supply some of the parts of the engine to the Tier 1 supplier. A Tier 3 supplier may supply some parts to the Tier 2 supplier. Within a complex supply chain, every supplier tier is managed, and each has to conform to the same ethical and sustainable standards. The OEM will conduct supplier audits on the entire supply chain network from time to time, but may also rely on the Tier 1 supplier to ensure the lower part of the chain is well managed to avoid exposure to the risk factors discussed in the supply chain tiering section above. It is the responsibility of the OEM to ensure each tier of its supply chain conforms to organizational standards as well as any external regulations or legislation. In reality, supply chain are far more complex, and an organization's suppliers may also be supplying its competitors or even directly to its customers. Viewing the relationships as a complex network provide a more strategic understanding of the interrelationships and the risk and opportunities in a market or industry. You can see that the suppliers are tiered and that Tier 1 suppliers are closet to the buyers of the manufacturing section. The diagram also shows how the goods flow throughout the global network until they reach the consumer. Complex supply chains and supply chain networks require experienced and skilled individuals to manage them. It is considered best practice to map your organization's supply chain. Supply chain mapping, once complete, gives a representation of your supply chain activities, locations, resources, and suppliers in the clear format that is convenient and easy to understand. Supply chain modification or redesign can then be more easily visualized. Supply chain mapping also assists in an organization's efforts to combat modern-day slavery and other unethical practices. Most organizations only conduct due diligence on the first tier of their supply chain, so the potential for illegal practices to exit in different tier exists. So any activity on those areas need to be particularly well checked. Now let's move to the fifth point. 1.1.5 Definitions of Logistics and Materials Management. What is logistics? Logistics is the process of planning, implementing, and controlling procedures for the efficient and effective transportation and storage of goods, including services and related information, from the point of origin to the point of consumption for the purpose of conforming to customer requirements. Logistics is the control of the flow of goods or services between 2 points. It is about making sure that people or things are where they need to be at the correct time. Logistics include handling, packaging, inventory, warehousing, and transportation. Logistics in the supply chain network. Logistics is involved in every stage of the supply chain. Internal and external logistics. Logistics can be internal or external. Internal logistics include the processes that are related to turning the raw material into the desired end product. These processes are the following: extraction, production, manufacturing, warehousing, storage. External logistics processes include the following: distribution, transport, retail. Internal and external logistics. Logistics requires several areas to be managed in order to keep the entire process running effectively. Demand planning, fleet management, inventory management, warehousing and storage, order fulfillment, internal and external logistics, demand planning. Demand planning is about knowing what is required and when. Within logistics, it relates to understanding what products are coming from where and at what time, as well as knowing where they need to go to and when. Demand planning can be achieved by working closely with other organizations in the supply chain and ensuring good and accurate communication. Fleet management. Fleet management is a broad term covering the solutions an organization uses to physically transport goods from one place to another. Fleets can be a number of vehicles owned by an organization if it runs its transport in-house, or they can be vehicles owned by a specialist company if the organization opts to outsource, but the most obvious disadvantage is a loss of control. Internal and external logistics. Inventory management, warehousing, and order fulfillment. Inventory management involves knowing how much inventory, stock, is available. Products should be stored in the correct way within warehouses. Warehouses should be laid out in a way that makes product selection quick and easy. Good warehouse designs include clear labeling or barcoding in the racking to enable products to be found effortlessly. If products cannot be found or are not in the right quantity, the distribution element of logistics cannot happen and orders can be left unfulfilled. In this situation, the supply chain process would fail as the consumer would not receive their goods. What is materials management? Materials management is a part of the supply chain and is concerned with the flow of materials to, from, and inside manufacturing production units. It covers the planning, handling, storage, inspection, and issuing of raw materials, components, and finished goods. Now, let's move to the last point. 1.1.6 Definitions of waste management and closed-loop recycling. Waste is a wide-ranging term encompassing most unwanted materials. Waste can be materials, substances, or byproducts. Why is waste management important? Waste management encompasses the strategies organizations use not only to dispose of waste, but also to reduce, recycle, and prevent it from occurring in the first place. Waste management is also a prominent feature at the end-of-life stages of asset management. If an organization is found to have acted irresponsibly in its disposal of waste, it could suffer reputational damage too. In many cases, there will be specific legislation relating to high-risk products and substances, for example with toxic chemicals and gases or electronic equipment. The benefits of effective waste management are compliance with regulations, meaning less risk of fines, penalties, or reputational damage. Positive impact on people, the planet, and its resource. Enhance brand reputation, meaning organizations, stakeholders, and suppliers will want to work with you. Cost saving associated with the elimination of unnecessary waste from the supply chain. One of the best ways to reduce waste is through the use of closed-loop recycling. Closed-loop recycling. Closed-loop recycling is where recycled waste can be reprocessed or repurposed indefinitely to make either new products or return to the environment as biodegradable waste. Closed-loop recycling refers to products that can be converted into new products without losing their properties during the recycling process, and do not require other materials to be added in order to create new products such as aluminum, glass, and some types of plastic. In contrast, open-loop recycling is where products go through the recycling process but need to be mixed with new materials in order to become a new product. The benefits of closed-loop recycling are as follows: preserves natural resource, minimizes the effect on the environment and wildlife, contributes towards supply chain sustainability. This is the end for today. With this, we have finished the first topic, and it has been explained through a practical example as well as through what is in the book. Reviewing the previous explanations completely eliminates the need for referring to any other sources. Ashraf Saleh was with you from Procurement Professional Channel. We will meet you soon to explain the CIPS L4 methodology. Thanks, and have a good day.